the purpose of today's webinar from myself, or my presentation, I should say, is to speak about storytelling. As Aaron correctly alluded to, we're a software or technology company, but more specifically a software development company based in Sydney. And I was presenting at last year's conference on a very different premise. But naturally, we became highly reactive to what was happening during COVID and devised a strategy that we didn't just roll out top line, but throughout the whole organization. And what I want to get across here is kind of what we did there. I'm not actually going to take you through my story yet or who I am intentionally. Naturally, I'd love to share the story of that. But before I do, I just want to give you a bit of an introduction as to kind of why we do storytelling, why this is something that I'm so fond of. And it's something that whether you're in marketing, sales, operations, or even if you're in HR, this is something that is fundamental to the way that you bring in new individuals into an organization, whether that be customers, staff, clients, boards of directors, etc. So as a bit of an introduction, one thing that I absolutely love is that historically as humans, we've been based around our whole emotional capacity is based around storytelling. This is what we create an emotional alignment with. We don't create, I'm sorry about the jumping around of the slides. We don't create an emotional attachment to anecdotes or to facts. We create an emotional alignment with storytelling. And so that's why, I believe, so I'm not sure what's happening here with the jumping of the slides. But it's why it was so fundamental to what we did during COVID. In my eyes, as I've written here, it's the secret weapon to creating a recognizable brand that people emotionally align with. I really believe that we love hearing stories as humans, and it's what we attach to. But I also think at its core, we've almost been trained not to tell stories. We've all been trained to tell the 30-second elevator pitch, which is how can we get across what we do in the most succinct way possible, generally with 3 to 4 key points that someone will remember in their minds, in their short-term memory, and then we can remind them over and over again for the next few weeks who it is that we are and what it is that we do. We've been forced to almost align with this short-term thinking instead of creating stories that people emotionally align with and really that we remember. So I'll talk a bit to our success with this, because it's all well and good to say that we went down the path of creating stories as a strategy within Station 5, and there wasn't just one. But we kind of what the success was overall. First, I think to create that, understanding of why it was so successful, it's important to recognize that we weren't a business that was needed during COVID. We weren't a business who operated in, say, primary industry or food and beverage distribution. We certainly didn't sell toilet paper. But what we did do was notice that between the months of February and April of 2020, we noticed a 40% drop in month-on-month revenue. So 40% of and we're a very recurring revenue-based business, 40% of our revenue completely dropped. What we did at that point was we actually consolidated our service offering from 6 services down to 1, which sounds absolutely ludicrous. But due to what was happening, we had to get rid of a lot of our staff from our team because we couldn't support them anymore. And as a result, we consolidated to 1 service offering. Since then, and between the months of May and September 2020, we have since multiplied 5x on where we were. I've seen a lot of businesses that have gone through transformations that haven't been as successful. And while I believe that we've gone down the path of creating a great service offering, it was all predicated on storytelling. And it's something that as an individual, as an entrepreneur, I would take with me through every business that I operate. It's also something that I impart upon our internal marketing and sales team, simply because I see that as an underpinning culture change that needs to happen. And we need to move away from this idea that a 30-second elevator pitch is the way to win business. I want to give you a quick idea of what the difference looks like. I've written here kind of 2 points. The first is, who am I when described anecdotally? And then who am I when we convert that to a story? Now, I'm conscious that an anecdote is really a story. I see an anecdote as a very short snippet or a story, and it's how we often talk about ourselves or our businesses. But let's talk about who we are when we convert that into a story as well. I'm going to read out the old anecdote I used to use to describe myself. This is myself as an individual, right? So this is not Station 5. This is myself as an individual. Who am I when described anecdotally? I'm Lambros Photios. I started my first business while at university, which later became recognized as one of Australia's fastest growing technology companies, being an AFR fast starter. I pushed myself further and created other businesses where I was able to embed my passion for creating rich technology within antiquated industries. It sounds all right. It sounds fairly cool. And arguably it's straight to the point, which I respect. But we then converted that into a story. And here's what it sounds like. I was a year into my university studies when I noticed that the struggle people were facing in the employment market after the global financial crisis in 2008. This caused me to reflect on whether the conventional path that I'd been following was the best way. For 6 months, I followed a hobby of software development to consult companies through digital transformation. What I discovered at the age of 19 was that people didn't care much for transforming antiquated industries and processes, caring much more for profit than progression. I became obsessed with creating new concepts that didn't exist and challenged the status quo. This led me to creating Station 5. My intention was to enable those who were brave enough to tackle unnecessarily outdated industries while simultaneously disrupting the obsolete consulting industry with Station 5. Within 2 years, Station 5 became an AFR fast starter as one of Australia's fastest growing technology companies and continues to work with disruptive startups and challenge the norm of the consulting industry. I'm thankful for the mentors who have guided me along the way, the likes of Mark Wozniak, Craig Davies, and Rob Morris. That's a side-by-side comparison of an anecdote versus a story. And it may seem that a story is a lot less to the point. Ultimately, what we're trying to do is create that emotional alignment. And what I'm going to take you through today is how to create a story where you can create that emotional alignment and that recognition. What we use as the kind of basis for this is what we call the hero's journey. The hero's journey is an interesting one. It's a 3-step process that follows these steps that I've put in here. Those kind of key stages are the departure, the initiation, and the return. You might be quite familiar with this. Marvel uses it organically in their superhero films. Hollywood has a habit of using it for a plethora of their films. It's also very much used in novels, whether you read fiction or non-fiction. This kind of core structure is what's used over and over again. And as the names kind of insinuate, from departure, initiation, and return, we start off with the departure, which is ultimately the effectively where someone is at their original point in time, their natural habitat, if you will. And the departure is going from that natural habitat into the unknown. It's that commencement of the adventure. There is then the initiation, which is where you will see the hero in the hero's journey undergo some sort of transformation. And it is through that transformation, or that transformation happens, through an extensive turmoil or struggle. And from that, they are quote unquote initiated. And then there's the return. There's the return to the place where they originated from, but are now being a different person. And this is what we kind of frame up as the hero's journey. The reason this is, now you may say, oh, we don't like hero's journey, not really relevant to a business. What I'm here to talk about today is that it is if you can tailor it in the right way. And so what I want to go through is a process of taking your business, whether it's a business that you own and operate, you're the founder of, or if you operate within, say, a marketing or sales team, how you can go through this process and use this to bring it back to marketing. Realistically, the reason that this is so fundamental is that, or why it's relevant to marketing, is that this is a framework for storytelling. This 3-step process is that framework, and we're going to use that so that you can communicate it in any way, shape, or form. If you do research into storytelling, and this is more of just an aside, there is a 12-step lengthier process, which is the hero's journey that you see here. This goes into much more kind of detail. The way that I've laid this out, and you're welcome to take a screenshot, is just kind of going through 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and so on, with 11 and 12 across the bottom. What these are, and if you've ever followed a superhero movie, or one that I also always love to relate back to hero's journey, is a Lord of the Rings movie, any of the 3 movies, is that this framework is very heavily used as part of the process. I'd say in the context of business though, when you're creating a story that you're going to share with people, following all 12 steps can be tricky. And a lot of the time these merge into one. Say 2 or 3 merge into one, which is why I've focused on more of a 3-step framework here, which is the higher level version of the hero's journey. Let's go into the hero's journey for business. Oops, sorry. So to create a kind of business-centric story, there are 5 questions that I want you to ask yourself first. It's not that we're going to go through the process of actually creating a story just yet. We're going to create the framework for it. And the reason that we create a framework for it is that in going through this process, you want to not just have the ability to tell a story, you want the ability to tell stories regularly. And so we need to contextualize that story or those iterations of the story so that they're easier to tell for different audiences, of course. These are the 5 key questions I want you to ask yourself. What is it that you do? What is it that your business does? Why do you do it? And this really comes back to that reason why. If anyone's familiar with It Starts With Why by Sinek, this is really what we're trying to delve into here with point 2. Step 3 is what have you achieved? Step 4 is who has been involved? And step 5 is what comes next. We're going to go into each step, so don't feel like you need to rush through this just yet. Actually, the premise for this whole kind of dialogue is to go through this step by step and to make sure you come away at the end of it with a framework you can follow. So just moving on to the next slide, we're going to go through an activity now. I'm conscious a lot of you are working from home, potentially got distracted by emails and the like. If you're not, which I hope you're not, then pull out a pen and paper or hop into a document and really start to document this process with me. So we're going to go through 5 steps and we're going to apply this to a real business. I want you to take either your business or the business that you work at, and I want you to follow this process. I've jotted down some really quick points. I'm going to use Station 5, which is the software company, to do this, but I would like you to do your own at the same time. Feel free to use the Q&A. If I'm going through things a bit too quickly, then feel free to just drop something in the Q&A saying, hey, can you stop on that slide, or can you explain this a bit more? It's really critical. I know I've got Q&A at the end. It's really critical we get this step right. So step 1, what do you do? This should really be the easiest one to answer. What is it that your business does? What is a day-to-day? What does each team member do? For large organizations, you probably do much more. For smaller organizations, I would assume there might be 1 or 2 products or services that you offer to the market. In the case of Station 5, for instance, we do software development. So custom web and mobile app development for our clients. That's the what. Should be fairly straightforward. It's fine if it's just 3 or 4 words, just quickly jotting down what it is that you do as an organization. And again, as I said, we're really trying to create the framework here. So don't worry about the story just yet. This is the underpinning framework that we'll keep referring to as we go. Step 2, why do you do it? So this, in my eyes, is the trickiest step. I believe a lot of businesses never actually define this. There are businesses that I've seen that have operated for decades and are publicly listed companies on the ASX, NASDAQ, New York Stock Exchange that haven't defined why they actually do what they do. Apple has one of the richest whys, which is to put a dent in the universe. That is literally their reason why. What we want to get at here is the why, that underpinning vision. If you've gone through the vision, mission, values process, we really want to get that vision out here. So what does the business stand for? Why does it exist? What is it that excites the team? If you're focusing on that vision, though, if you're focusing on that VMV or vision, mission, values framework that I know a lot of early stage businesses create, like we did about 5 odd years ago, I want you to jot down both the vision and the mission, if possible. So vision for Station 5, that really high level borderline philosophical statement to create connections between people. And then the mission is to disrupt antiquated industries with technology. So if you kind of think of that as the vision and mission, and you have that same kind of framework within your business, I want you to jot down both the vision and the mission. Ironically, the mission comes in more handy when writing the story. As I said, if anyone's got any questions, feel free to drop them into the Q&A, and I'll keep an eye on that as we go. Next step 3. What have you achieved? I think it's always valuable to kind of point out what achievements you have. Have you won awards? Are there other areas you've been recognized? Do you have any flagship clients or KPIs? For instance, to give you some of Station 5's at the start, we're an AFR fast starter, as I mentioned. We were Business Australia's fastest moving company. This was all in the first couple of years, so we recognized that. So I've just been moved here. Cool. And then any flagship clients, particularly as early stage businesses, pointing out who the earlier clients are ultimately helps to build that reputability and that rapport within the industry. And so it's important to kind of point those out here as well. Yeah, Mim, I'm not too sure, sorry, on your question. Otherwise, I would have done it a while ago. Step 4, who has been involved within the business? I don't want you to just talk about team members. We spoke a bit about flagship clients before. So I want to talk about absolutely everything. Top level board members and advisors, mentors, executives, team members, and then clients and customers. I really want you to map out kind of who's been involved, because this is fundamental. And when you say, okay, the team members might not be as relevant, Lambros, to creating a story, while they may not be as relevant to creating the story, these are ultimately the beacons of the storytelling. When an individual comes into Station 5 now, whether it be that they're a software developer, a consultant, or they're in sales or marketing, making sure that they're across this process is fundamental. As I said, we're creating the underpinning structure here or framework, and this is about getting everything on paper so that we have a centralized kind of resource point for storytelling. So make sure you get everything out here. Why are clients and customers important? Obviously, these are the people who you're going to kind of tell your story to most regularly, but your existing clients and customers, the reason we write that down is because we want to communicate this story with them. We want to make sure that they are aware of why we've done what we've done as an organization. Let me loop back. Referral-based business is often some of the best business to get. I know in B2B, it often is for us. And that's why I like to focus on clients and customers as well. Because I find by having that kind of lens of focusing on clients and customers and communicating with them, if you can create that emotional attachment with them, it keeps you top of mind when they're communicating with others who could benefit from your product or service. I've seen, as an aside, Station 5's referral rate increase significantly, and it was ultimately the driver of that 5x growth that we had between May and September of this year. The reason for that growth, I would say, is heavily driven by those referrals from existing customers. Step 5, what comes next? Alrighty, this is the big one, but also, again, quite easy to answer a lot of the time. Why are you at this conference? Why are you attending this talk? What struggles are you facing as an organization right now or as a marketer right now? And ultimately, where do you want to take things? As an organization or as an individual operating within an organization, like, what are your KPIs? What are your goals? Where do you want to take this company as a whole? We really need to understand that. I know it's key, but try and put down 3 or 4 points that you believe are kind of fundamental to where you want to be next. Sorry about the jumping around the slides. Not sure why it's not locking there. Cool. So just kind of looping back to Station 5, I know I kind of jumped back there more to the theory than the actual execution. So, why we do what we do, I said, to disrupt antiquated industries with technology, which was step 2. Step 3, what have you achieved? That's where we focused on AFR Fast Starter, Business Australia Fast Mover, etc. Next, step 4, who has been involved? This is where we map out the team. We talk about advisors like Craig Davies and Mark Wozniak and their credentials as advisors or mentors to the business. And then step 5, what comes next? For us during COVID, and I assume for a lot of you as well, we've got we've consolidated our service offering to one. And so our key kind of outcome is adoption, right? If you could frame it down into one word, it's adoption. So adoption is kind of the word that's constantly sticky to my laptop screen. as what we need to focus on. It's about getting people on board with the way that we do things, why we're unique in our change. And it's not about adoption just by customers and clients. It's about adoption for new staff. I'm just going to stop there and just remind you one more time. I know I've said this 3 or 4 times, but this is not your story. This is really just the skeleton or the underpinning framework that we're about to use to create the story. Next is, what do we do next? Or sorry, why did we do that? So this exercise, I said, was to contextualize the story. We want to write something that's really compelling. But this next slide, types of stories, really describes why in this conversation, we can't just go about the process of creating a one-size-fits-all story. And I can tell that to my marketing team, my sales team, my consultants, my engineers, and anyone else that may be within the organization, and hope that it sticks. There's much more than one story that you need to create. What you need to become an expert at is communicating that story. The people who you share this with, also need to become great at telling that story. And that's why that point at the bottom of this slide is so critical. This is a culture shift, not a marketing campaign. This is not about, hey, we've created a story, we're going to go create a TV ad off the tail end of it. This is a culture shift where people in the organization need to talk regularly about your story. They need to be able to tell the story off the cuff without being asked or looking at a script. They need to be capable of telling the story. I think the true sign of success in storytelling is when your team is actively able to communicate that story when prompted without any instruction to. They are able to communicate that in a way that you, as the person who has created that culture shift, are proud of the way they're communicating it. Here are a few different use cases or story types that differ. For instance, the story type between investors and boards of directors are vastly different. Investors, you're trying to get investors on board to invest in an organization. A board of directors, on the other hand, are already there to support you, and it's about communicating a story with them that helps to create an alignment between C-level executives and the board of directors, right? So a very different story that ultimately needs to be told because there's a different outcome you're trying to get from that engagement. So just to run through, here are 6 or so different story types that need to be presented. We've got investors, boards of directors, team members, clients or customers. You have marketing collateral such as your website, and you have communications teams such as PR teams and the like. The list obviously goes on. It is endless who you need to communicate that with. But at a high level, it's about making sure, again, that we have that contextualization. Let's revert back to the template. I'm conscious we've only got about 15 more minutes and we need to leave some time for Q&A. So back to the template. Now that you've got this skeleton, right, what we need to now shift our focus onto is back to that 3-step process. As I said, we're not going to get a story out of this. We're going to get a structure for creating stories. But I really want you to focus on that departure, the initiation, and the return. A great story generally is if you write the story from top through to bottom, there's generally a halfway point, which is the turning point. And the beauty of that when you're creating a story is it creates a really nice structure as to what you can follow. I'll go through that in a bit more detail because it's new info and we're jumping around again. So the departure, as I said at the start, that's really about leaving to go to the foreign land. It's leaving the familiarity to go to the foreign land. The initiation is when you're going through that challenge. And then the return is when you're returning from the foreign land back to the familiar environment that you as an individual have changed, right? And we need to follow that structure. I spoke briefly about my success. I can't write everyone's story for them as much as I'd love to because I think it's incredibly powerful. But I do want to share with you what the marketing version of the story was that I created for Station 5. And then with the extra time that we've got after that, I've got 2 more agenda items. The first is that I'd like to actually communicate with you how I communicated this over the phone with existing clients and new companies who are coming on board. And then after that, we'll delve into some Q&A, which I think we'll have roughly about 10 minutes for. So the story, the marketing version of the story. And I'll go through and point out where those 3 sections are or where that turning point is. Station 5 was founded from an obsession with creating new concepts that didn't exist and challenged the status quo. We worked with large corporations and governments to enable their digital transformation journey. Within 2 years, Station 5 became an AFR Fast Starter as one of Australia's fastest growing technology companies. That's our kind of initiation, right? That's our leaving the promised land. Now the turning point. The industry transformed when larger organizations were hit by COVID-19 and stopped innovating. This is that turning point. This is that initiation now. We knew the people who could rebuild normality would be the bold entrepreneurs who seized the opportunity to drive innovation. It was at this moment that Station 5 transformed, now returned back from the foreign land. Station 5 has since worked to create a unique model built for startup founders, enabling them to disrupt antiquated industries and challenge the norm. We understand the solitary existence of founders and continuously aid them in disruption. You can see that we've gone through this transformation from a business that serviced large end of town to exclusively servicing startups. And you can see that there's kind of that transition point and the motivation for why that needed to happen. And we've followed that kind of 3-step structure in terms of how we've gone about it. That's the story in terms of how we market it. That's available on our website as well if you want to check it out, which is just station5.com. But the last thing I want to communicate with you, which is a story that I communicate with all team members and clients when they come on board with us or when they're considering coming on board with us, is the story that you always need to tell because you're regularly asked it both in interview settings, but also in the setting of of converting a prospect into a client or a customer. And that story is that story is often triggered by the question, which is, hey Lambros, what is it that you guys do? Or what is it that Station 5 does? Or what is it that makes Station 5 different to the other software companies I'm considering? And it's a question that we always hear in pitching. And it's a question that always pops up in marketing as well, because it needs to be answered. What is the USP? And it's so difficult, as I said, to confine everything to this 30-second elevator pitch kind of structure or monologue, where ultimately what we're left with at the end of the day is trying to find the 3 single points that people can align with and will speak to their pain points. We focus so much on speaking to people's pain points instead of creating emotional alignment. When you create that emotional alignment, as I said, it's when people are really going to embed within your business and they're really going to become emotionally attached, and creating that kind of conversation around what is it that you do that's different becomes incredibly easier because you're not on a 30-second clock. So let's run through that real quick. An organization comes to Station 5. I'm on the phone because it's COVID and we're not having meetings. And the question comes out, which is, I've told you, Lambros, I've told you all about what we want to do. What's Station 5 and how you guys going to help me to actually get there? And I was asked this question quite recently, and I'm continuously asked this. And the answer generally goes something as follows. I'll assume the individual's name is Fred, who I'm communicating with. Hey, Fred. Yeah, so, I've told you briefly about Station 5 in the past. So I assume you've been kind of introduced to us, through the mutual introduction that we're a software development company. But I'll tell you a bit about kind of where we came from and our grassroots. Station 5 originated ultimately as a software development company. We were founded back in June of 2015. And when we started, we were focused very heavily on software development. We did this and focused purely on this. And it was very quickly that we're able to resonate with some really high-end clients. We worked with the likes of EY, Qantas, and Bupa within our first 12 months of existence. We were growing extremely quickly. And what we did over time, which was probably one of the biggest mistakes that I made as the business's CEO, is that I introduced a number of different service offerings that were complementary to the existing service offerings. So, I'm not sure how familiar you are with the kind of software development process or products development process, but, prior to software development, you have branding, user interface, and user experience design. You have feature prioritization, and then eventually you delve into software development. And then once the software development's done, then you go into software testing, and then you do cybersecurity or penetration testing, and then you do DevOps and eventually go live. And it's this whole kind of, roadmap that exists for a tech product, which I'm not sure if you're familiar with all the stages. It doesn't really matter. But we tried to do all of them. We partnered with some providers to help us white label or offer additional services. Or on the flip side of the coin, we actually started to bring in employees who could help us with that. The problem was we were spread really thin, which meant that we didn't have huge teams that were focused to one thing or another. And so what we did at that point was what we did was when COVID hit in February and everyone went into lockdown in Australia, we were ultimately forced to scale right down. We lost 40% of our clients literally in a month off our books. And what we did at that point was we did one of the hardest things that could have been done, which was actually reduce the number of services that we offered. So we scaled down our service offering from 6 or so services in that software development lifecycle down to just one service offering, which probably seems like the most reckless thing we could do, because at that point we removed another 10 to 15% of our revenue generation because we had to remove clients because we removed those service offerings. We were hit hard. But the reason we did that was to focus back on our grassroots, to focus on why we started. We focused on setting up software development exclusively. That was all we were going to do. But we didn't just focus on, doing software development for our old clients. We focused on how can we do this for startups. And so the reason that we went down that path of focusing on startups was that the larger enterprise players and governments removed their innovation budgets. It ceased during COVID because it couldn't produce a direct ROI that was quantifiable to their boards of directors and others that they needed to report to. And so what we did was we focused on startups and entrepreneurs because they had venture capital funding that had already been provided and needed to be spent. And we focused on making sure that we could provide them with a unique service offering. And so we took our Australian team and we took the consultants from those teams to work with those startups. We partnered them with developers over in the Philippines and created these rich teams where software developers offshore would work full-time for a client to build out their product rapidly, using the expertise that they gained and the processes they gained from working with large end of town. And we introduced a layer over the top of that, which were the local Australian-based consultants who could communicate with our clients who weren't technical people, worked with our clients, and were also able to convert that business level logic into technical logic that could be conveyed to a software development team. That consultant ultimately acted as a conduit between the two. And it's through this that we were able to transform the business and grow 5x. And that's effectively kind of what the story was. And it was through that the business multiplied quite rapidly. But with that, let's take a pause there. We've got about 7 or so minutes. I'm going to shift over to the Q&A. If anyone's got any questions, now's the best time to answer. You're also, while anyone types in questions, and that's on the left-hand side in the little speech bubble there with the question mark over the top, if you want to ask anything, feel free to contact me on that email. That's my personal email address if you want to shoot me any questions that you've got about storytelling. As it's obviously clear, I run a software company. I'm not running a marketing company, so I can't help you too much with marketing endeavors if you like, but feel free to send me any questions that you've got from a storytelling perspective, and I'd love to share in any way that I can. And also, as Aaron mentioned earlier, I ran the podcast for last year's Australia and New Zealand version of DigiMarcon. And I also run a podcast called The Venture Podcast, where we do a lot of podcasts about storytelling and the like. If you want to check that out as well for some more resources, there's quite a bit there from industry experts in the space. I can see we don't have any questions. I might give it 10 or 15 more seconds and then hand it back to Aaron for our next speaker.